Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Collect Our Cousins. Today is March 17, 2022. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm going to read my preamble and then I'm going to introduce our guest, and we're going to have an awesome conversation. I created Collect Our Cousins, engaging white Americans in the struggle for full democracy to help white Americans like me become more effective in our conversations with white people in our lives, to help us build an embodied anti racist white culture, in the words of Resma Menachem. I'm featuring the people who inspire and teach me the most. White Americans, the battle for our democracy will not be won in courtrooms or in the streets. It must be won in white living rooms, at our dinner tables, in our neighborhood meetings, school board meetings. As an anti racist, collecting my cousins often falls to the end of my to do list. Oh, I'll get to that next month. But I'd like to encourage everyone here to participate in the Collect Our Cousins challenge. Write a list of your friends and family you will collect this year. There are 21 million Americans, largely white, who believe that Donald Trump is the legitimate president and political violence may even be necessary to restore him. We are frontline in that struggle. And I encourage us to remain empathetic in our conversations. And yeah, that's basically it. I'm so grateful today that, oh, and I didn't mention my name. I'm Karen Fleshman, founder of Racy Conversations. And I'm so grateful today to be joined by one of my dear friends, Mindy Gulati. Mindy and I originally met on LinkedIn. This was several years ago. And we saw in our backgrounds so many similarities. We're both attorneys who have dropped the practice of law to become DEI consultants for workplaces. We're both moms raising biracial children. And we're both deeply, deeply committed to justice. And like Mindy does now, I previously lived in Austin, Texas. So we have a lot in common. And one time when Mindy was in San Francisco for a business trip, we were able to meet in person. And that in person meeting just further um, cemented our friendship. And I know we're going to be sisters throughout our lives. And I'm so grateful to you, Mindy, for inspiring me and helping me to be better, helping me to remain in this struggle, walking me through when I'm having difficult moments. You do such a good job of just giving really, really insightful and compassionate advice. And I'm so grateful that you've made time to join us here this morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me, Karen. And Karen and I have been lucky enough to spend some time together when I've traveled to San Francisco, which has been awesome. And looking forward to today's conversation. I started to go way back. I have this feeling inside of me that the pursuit of justice and equity just courses through my veins since I was a little kid. So I was the little kid in elementary school, in middle school, who would get in some degree of trouble every once in a while, good trouble, but trouble for speaking up and standing up. And I was really fortunate to be raised in a family that valued the importance of white folks doing racial justice work and being involved in civil rights. And that was really the reason I wanted to go to law school. And so I went to law school to do racial justice work. And I did not know where that would end up being. I think initially most people go to law school thinking of doing civil rights, think of, oh, I'm going to go work for the ACLU, right? That's like the thing that people think. And I got into law school and realized quickly that I loved criminal defense work. And so I started my career, and all my internships were with public defender offices in Southern California. So I started my career as a deputy public defender in Orange County, California, and felt like that was a place where I could make some real significant impact, having my background of wanting to, further equity, and what greater place to see inequity than in our criminal justice system, especially for indigent clients, those who need the services of a public defender. And so that's where I started my professional career. I had lots of jobs before that. And it's taken me on a exceptional journey of understanding different people, understanding how complex human beings are, and watching the manifestations of racism and classism and poverty and mental health issues. And that was one of the most monumentally important parts of my life, was being a public defender. And
Mm.
I moved to Austin and opened a consulting firm, on the advice of one of my good friends, and here I am today. And so excited to kind of talk through how I got here and what role I think we have to play in this work.
Yes. If um, share a little bit about your conversations with other white people in your life, like when you were a public defender and you're witnessing so much systematic injustice that then impacts this one individual, and it's going to send this individual into prison.
Mm-hmm.
Here in California, since 1980, we have built 22 prisons and one university.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we talk to other white people about what is going on within that,
Mm-hmm.
and help them see the injustice of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, the being a public defender gives you a window into probably one of the most unjust systems that exist in our country, and it was designed to exist in this way. And so when I was in practice and doing this work, I would watch the gross inequities in front of me, and I was never the type of person to let those things go for the sake of how busy I was, or how, I think a lot of people in criminal justice, whether they're the prosecutor, the defense, the judges, the bailiffs, I think everyone sees it day in and day out. So you can start to become numb to it, right? If you're not careful. So I made it really like a personal policy that if I saw something, I would say something. And even if it didn't necessarily impact that exact case, I was always prepared to put things on the record. I was always prepared to talk to the DA about how inequitable their offer was, or how inequitable the sentence was, or how I would point things out, right? And I do think it helped. I had some DAs comment to me throughout the course of my time as a public defender of like, thanks for showing me certain things, right? Thanks for showing me the way. There was a case that I had toward the end of my time as a public defender, and it was a statutory rape case, and a whole host of other charges, and it was with my client was a young Black man. And I worked particularly hard on this case because it was the attitude of the police officers involved, the alleged victim involved, the prosecutors, was very much like this person, my client, didn't really matter, and that of course they probably did this, and of course this is going to happen again. And so I would sit in the DA's office, which is kind of unusual. You do most of your negotiating in the courtroom. And I would just go sit in their office and wait for them, wait for this particular DA. And I shared the story of my client, right? So I think that one thing that I did in talking to white folks about the inherent racism in our criminal justice system wasn't just to say, hey, there's inherent racism in criminal justice, or here's some data, or here's all the research, because that all exists. And I think actually a lot of people know about that. But I think that if they have a story to hear, if you humanize and paint the comprehensive picture of your client to them, it does make a difference. And should they understand this from the outset, that this is a human being? Yes, they should. But again, we oftentimes don't see people. I don't think that's just prosecutors. I think that all of us sometimes fail to actually see people for who they are, and the complexity of their identity. And so I'm, when you asked me this question, this is the first case I thought about, because I spent so much time, and then about 7 years later, I got a LinkedIn message from his mom, and
Hmm.
she sent me a message. She found me on LinkedIn, and this is a long time after the case, probably, like 7, 8 years later. And she basically said, because you fought so hard for him, like, he's doing really well. He did have to go to prison, but I saved him from certain consequences that would have penalized him his entire life, like registering as a sex offender and things like this. And she wrote me this heartfelt message on LinkedIn and said, he went to college, he's married, he has kids, he's thriving in Colorado, and you are the reason. And I bring that story up because it wasn't just me, though. The DA had to help. The DA had to have a part in this. And it was a white male, right? And so he had to sit with me. And I kind of forced my way in by never leaving his office till he would listen to me. But he listened to the story of my client. My client's name is Jeremy, and he listened to the story of Jeremy, and he then did what he could to butt up against the gross inequities that were out there. And so I share this because, the conversation we're having today is, how do you engage white folks in this work? And I think that storytelling and building relationship is super important. And in this case, in this criminal justice, context, I'm pretty sure the only reason we got the result we did is because I told his story authentically and compassionately and passionately. And the DA kind of had no other choice but to listen. But to the DA's credit, he did listen. And he did say, all right, I'm going to make it, like, I am not going to go with my original thoughts on this case. We're going to do something different. And so I think that, our work is to share stories and to give people space to learn and to grow. And then usually I have found that when you give people that space, if you give people space to grow, they will grow.
Mm. I love that so much. And I think we were talking before this about how important having interpersonal relationships across difference are, um, to our growth as human beings, and how, unfortunately, by design, growing up in residential segregation, educational segregation, often it's not until we get to college or the workplace that we start to have interactions across difference.
Mhm.
And could you talk a little bit about how to earn trust across difference from a position of privilege?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's a good point because, I like, there's this book, it's my top one of my top books I recommend, The Sum of Us by Heather McGee. And she
Mm,
has a whole chapter called Living Apart, and it's about how the United States was intentionally designed for us to live apart from other races, right? And that segregation is apparent. And I live in Austin, right? I've been here for 10 years. I didn't know it when I moved here, but Austin is, one of the most segregated places in the United States by design. In 1928, the city created a city plan, to segregate our city and to only allow Black folks to receive city services if they lived in one district. And they didn't want them living all over Austin. So
mm,
they said, if you live over here, you get city services. If you live elsewhere, you're not going to get city services. And in Austin today, it is unbelievably segregated, both in schools, in communities, and neighborhoods. And I will give talks in Austin, and a lot of folks come up to me afterwards. A lot of white folks come up to me afterwards, and they ask me, "Well, how do I make a Black friend?" And they're sincere because
mm.
they've never had that opportunity, and they don't know. And I think that's a damning statement. That
Well,
is that.
research shows that 75% of white people have 0
Mhm,
Black friends,
mhm,
and 90% of white people's friends are white.
mhm,
So
mhm.
we're not,
Yeah.
this is the outcome,
This
and
is.
that's before the pandemic and the racial reckoning and all of that.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I think that, I mean, this is real, right? So and 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 I think for me, I have, like I said, I was really fortunate to be raised in a family that valued diversity of relationships, of perspectives. And I grew up in Utah, which is a very white place, right? The snow's white, the people are white, everything's white, right? And but when I was growing up, I was raised with what I say is a healthy narrative of difference, which is that if you meet someone that's different than you should be curious about them. You should want to get to know them. I have in turn, the two things I wanted to raise my kids as is I wanted them to be kind, genuinely kind, and I wanted them to have a healthy narrative of difference, which is when you meet someone that is different than you, and I don't care what that difference is, I want them to have a healthy feeling of, I want to know this person. I want to understand their story, their perspectives. I want to, you know, offer them safe harbor and friendship. And that's really what, that's something that I think I have been very good at in my life. But it was a learned behavior, right? And it was again from my family. So I'll give a shout out to them. But, I would say, the majority of my closest friends and best relationships are with people who are different than me, both race, class, religion, ethnicity, language, immigration status, and that
Age.
age, definitely age. I would say two of my best friends in this world are 60-year-old Black women, and they are my friends. They are who I love the most. And again, I didn't expect them to immediately give me their friendship or immediately give me their trust, right? Because I understand I understand what likely they have went through in the past with white women. And so I am just who I am. I'm an open book. I'm authentic. I'm loving. I'm kind. I'm compassionate, and I really get to know them. So I mean, there's not a silver bullet this is not like a best practice guide to making a Black friend, right? I think if you want to make any friend, you have to earn trust. You have to be dependable. You have to be committed and consistently show up for them. And you have to open all of your doors to them, right? The thing that I think is really interesting is that if you think about who you spend your time with day to day, not at work, right? Work is, again, we're a place where a lot of times people, it's the only place where they find diversity in their life is at work. But it's like, who is at your house? Who comes to dinner? Who do you invite to birthday parties? Who do you spend your weekends with? Who's in your, who do you hang out with in your neighborhood, and those kinds of things. And I think that there can be, if you don't have a diverse group of people around you, I think there can be that historical recognition that, man, we've been kept away from each other and this is bullshit, right? But then you have an obligation to do something about that, right?
Right.
And if you go into relationships completely unaware of the struggle of the person across from you, you're likely not going to have a deep relationship with them either, right? One thing I'll say is that, I grew up with a grandma who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 5. And I spent every day of my life with her. And so I watched a healthy person become completely disabled in a wheelchair bound, and watching her and living with her and taking her places and shopping with her, right? I got an insight into what it must be like to live with a disability. I don't
Mhm.
I don't have that disability, but it gave me a window into her world, right? Especially when we would go out into public, right? At home, sure, like we kind of just function together in a very seamless way, but it's when we had to go to the grocery store or go to the mall or go shopping for clothes. How do you try on clothes when you're in a wheelchair? And I think that's the beauty of having diverse relationships, whether they're in your family, your friends, or whatever it may be, is that you do get a window into how other people live. And you should be able to build empathy without having a personal relationship, right? But it also adds, I think, such beauty to life to not be around folks who are just like you, right?
Yes.
I find it to be my happiest thing of life is that I exist in community with people who are very different than me every day of my life, including my own spouse and my children, who are different races, come from very different backgrounds. And my husband's family is very different from my family in every way in which you could actually probably, if you had to track all the identity, traits and like my in-laws versus like my own family, it's about every single one of them. But and it's challenging, right? And it challenges your assumptions and it challenges things, but it's just, it adds that beauty and complexity that I think is, you're not going to truly experience unless you lean into relationship.
I echo everything you said and have a similar experience. My ex-husband is Asian American, and my children are biracial, and I'm different from my ex-in-laws and my children in every way imaginable, and I love it because my children hold me to account. Mom, that's fat phobic. They're able to recognize. When my son was 7, he asked me, "Mom, which one do we need to end first, racism or sexism?" I'm like, "How?" Like, they were trying to teach me that when I was in college, and I couldn't understand what they were talking about. Like, how can it's just so beautiful to see.
Yeah.
I think children have an innate sense of justice, and so
Hmm.
if you're able to contextualize things to them, and
Hmm.
it also does not harm it has not harmed my children to learn about
Hmm.
the truly, truly ugly
Hmm.
aspects of our history and of
Hmm.
white people. So
Yeah.
when I see all this anti-CRT, when I see the kind of laws that are being passed in Texas, first of all, I just send a huge hug to everyone in Texas right now, struggling underneath all of this. And how can people who don't live in Texas, how can we
Mhm.
help you all out?
Yeah. So a couple of things, and I'll get to your Texas question in just a minute because it is rough down here, y'all. It is rough. But I want to go back to a little bit on the family side and on because I want white folks to understand that just because you're in community with and have relationships with, even if you have kids with folks that are different races or whatever dimension of diversity, it doesn't mean that you fully comprehend their experience, right? And so I just want to say that because I do hear white folks almost like in a competition to prove like how many people of color, black folks, indigenous folks they have in their life, and it's weird. So don't do that.
Racial
Yes.
credentialing.
So don't do that. I'm talking about like deeply authentic relationships. And also, there has to be that recognition is that you don't live that life. And even if your children or your spouse or your best friend in this world are, victims of racism, like you'll never get that in the same way. And I'll share one quick story and then I'll get to Texas. Is on January 6th, the day of the insurrection, I was working. I was on the phone with a client, and my office is at the front of the house, and my kids are, home, and we're all working from home. We're all doing homeschool. So this is, January of 2021. And my husband and I had been texting about like where we're going to get takeout, so we're going to get tacos for dinner. Definitely the Texas way. Have breakfast tacos for dinner is definitely the Texas way, right? And so we had text, and I knew he was about to go pick them up. And I just wrapped up a call with a client, and I'm getting ready to get on another call. And I hear my daughter Carmen, she was 7 at the time. She was 7. My husband says, "Hey," and look, we don't have the TV on at home. They're not like streaming CNN, but they had overheard me talking to my husband sometime in the day about what was going on at the Capitol. Just me being like, "Oh my gosh, can you believe this? Like, they're taking over the Capitol. They're rioting in there. They're maybe going to take hostages." And my daughter must have overheard something, but very subtle, right? So it wasn't like in her face. So my husband's at the front door. She comes running down the hall right outside my office. My doors are closed, so they don't know that I'm listening. And my daughter says, "Hey, Dad, where are you going?" And he says, "I'm going to go I'm going to go pick up tacos for dinner." And she said, "Dad, I think you should have Mom go because I think white people are going to kill us today."
Mm,
And she said, "So if Mom goes, no one's going to hurt her. So
mm,
we should stay home."
mm,
And hearing again, so she in her little 7 or 8 year old brain, a 7-year old brain is like, recognized white privilege that mom goes and gets the tacos, no one's going to target her. If dad goes and gets the tacos, problem, right? They're going to target dad. And so I heard this and I said, text my husband and I opened my door and said, hey, you know, I need to go run an errand. So let me go get the tacos. I didn't quite know what to say because I felt like bursting into tears, quite frankly, but I just wanted to lower her anxiety. And so I just opened and casually said, hey, I got to go do something. I didn't. And I didn't have to go run an errand, but I said, I'll go get him. You stay home. And she skipped down the hallway, like actually skipped, happy as could be, right? Because she knows that I walk in this world differently than she does, than my husband does. And so for those of you who are in community, in relationship, in solidarity with Black and brown folks, just recognize that you don't fully get it because you're not scared to go pick up tacos. And you are differently situated than those folks that are closest to you, even your own children, right? And so that was like such a painful experience, but it was so eye-opening because she recognized in that moment that it's not safe for us, meaning her dad, her brother, but it was safe for mom. And I tell people that story a lot, and especially white people, because I'm like, look, like we do not walk in this world in the same way. And no matter how filled in your life you have with, Black and brown folks, people with disabilities, people, LGBTQ folks, like unless you're living that existence, you are a person that has a lot of privilege. Because I did go get the tacos and I was not scared that anything would happen to me. I wasn't, right? And I've had a couple points in my life like these recognitions, but this one with my daughter was extremely powerful. And just watching her like skip down the hallway as happy as could be when she recognized that they didn't have to leave the house was just, it's still on me, right?
I feel that.
And so to get to Texas, right? I actually wrote a post last night. I don't put it on LinkedIn because sometimes LinkedIn and I just don't want to do it. But I wrote last night that I got 7 calls within 24 hours from people in my community who are just collapsing under the barrage of horrors that's going on in Texas. Whether it's about abortion rights, whether it's about transphobia and transgender kids being targeted, whether it's about, folks in the Latinx community. I mean, I got like 7 calls in 24 hours of people who are like, I'm crumbling. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to take care of myself. Like, and it's interesting because this week I've been feeling that a little bit too, of like, how are we supposed to survive this? And I know that this isn't the worst life has ever been. But if you're living in Texas right now, it's pretty dang bad. I know people who are parents who are being investigated because their kids are trans. One of my friends reached out to me after my 7 people. So this is after my post, and said, hey, I need to take a break from this project we're working on because this person is trans. And they said, I just cannot, I don't know what to do in my life. Like, I can't believe we're getting assaulted like this. And so Texas is a really, feel like it's not even a microaggression every day just to live here. It's like a macro, right? For everybody. If you're a woman, if you're a Black person, if you're a person of color, if you're LGBTQ, if you're poor, if you need an abortion, if you need access to healthcare, it's just wild here. And so
And it's an open carry state.
and it's open carry and very little COVID protocols and protections. And it's hard. And I don't, I don't know the answer of what you can do to help. Just understand that not everybody in Texas believes this, because sometimes I see my progressive friends saying like, fuck Texas, or like, but no, that's not okay. No, there's a lot of us here and there's a lot of people who can't just move, right? So I've had friends be like, hey, why don't you just move out of there? Well, I probably could move. I'm privileged enough to probably be able to go support my family somewhere else, but that's not the point, right? Most people can't. And also, Texas is a massive state and it's immensely diverse here. Houston's most diverse city in the country. it's an incredible state actually for a lot of reasons. It has, but it's also, it's also a place where I think racism is just dripping everywhere you go. I mean, it just is. You can feel it. You can taste it. You can taste the homophobia and transphobia. You can feel the hatred toward women, and it's not from everybody though. So don't just throw Texas out, and don't make fun of folks in Texas, right? So I think that you have to just reach out to your people in Texas and check on them, to be honest with you, because I've had a few people check on me. I've been checking on some people, and that's about all you can do. But that's, again, to go back to like building authentic relationships. That's what people need, right? Like, it makes me feel good if somebody authentically cares about me. It doesn't make me feel good if I have no, solid relationships with people. Like, that's not, I didn't want a gift. I don't need a Starbucks. I don't need any of that, right? It's like, I just need someone to kind of feel me and see me. And so see your friends in Texas and recognize that it is rough down here right now. And I don't know what's going to happen. And I think that, being in Austin, Austin, is the capital of the state. That my friend Fatima says this: the capital of the state that took 2 years to let enslaved folks know they were free. Right?
Mm.
Like, we, as a state, didn't even want to let that go. Right? We were accepting all the slaveholders to come here and escape, right, and try to continue to do their horrific, uh, run their horrific industries. And so when you're in Texas, I mean, it's you just have to call it out. But I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of brilliant, amazing people here, and we do need your support and your solidarity and your love, and don't throw us out with everything else that you hear. So
Thank you. And I do think that all these laws are in response. I mean, Texas is very close to turning blue, right? The demography of Texas is changing, and that's why they're passing these laws to try and clench on
mm-hmm.
to power
Mm-hmm.
as they become the minority.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a fear-based politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, it's like, there's, in science and biology, there's um, uh, uh, something called the extinction model, which is like, if you study frogs that are going extinct, they reproduce at like 10 times the rate that they normally do, right? If they lay
Mm.
100 eggs, now they're laying 1,000 eggs at the end of their species existence, right? And it's a way to try to preserve. And I guess a lot of white folks feel that they're somehow going to lose if other folks gain, or if other folks have more equitable treatment. And it's just not true. This is not a zero sum game, folks. Like we all benefit if there is more equity. Everybody benefits from that. And I just don't understand. I mean, that's the thing I wish people could get, is that nothing is being taken from you. No one's trying to take anything from you. Folks are just trying to be able to have access and opportunity in a fair and just way. That's not taking anything from you, because if you think it is, then that means you're getting things unjustly, unfairly, inequitably. And and again, like, in a capitalist system, they're going to pit people against each other, right? They're going to say, like, oh, watch out, these people are going to come take your jobs or your wages. And it's just not true. There's enough to go around. We have enough money and enough opportunity in this country to go around. And so, I think that's, when we see what the laws that are being created and stuff, it's like, I wish everyone could just take a deep breath and get out of fear-based living and be like, let's create this equity. Let's create this, let's live up to the dreams that a lot of people hold, and a lot of this sort of foundational, these beautiful, grandiose statements that are made in the United States. Like, let's live up to them. And actually, we can do it in a way that is better for everybody, right? I mean, I just think this is a really unhealthy environment to live in. And nothing's being taken from anybody, right? Nothing. And the thing is I sit in my work with a lot of white folks who are really resistant to, say, DEI work, or resistant to, some of the policies and procedures that companies are putting forth. And if I sit with them and listen to them, we always come to a resolution and understanding. Always. I have yet to ever embark upon a deep conversation about equity or inclusion or diversity and not been able to turn the mind of that person. It's not happened yet. Now, it doesn't happen online. It doesn't happen by arguing with people in social media. It happens by, again, relationship building, right? And so I have had what I say the privilege and the opportunity to sit with some very major resistors to DEI, folks who want to fly the Confederate flag, for instance. And I've sat with them for weeks and hours and talked to them. And at the end, they have a different understanding because,
Mm.
again, they do not have the information. They have not been told these things, right? And maybe it was their responsibility to seek it out and learn it sooner. But whatever it is, now we get to sit down and talk about it. And so I think when you're talking about collecting your cousins, I think conversation is the way forward, but it has to be from the heart too, right? I when I talk about DEI, I say, and DEI can mean justice, it can mean all of those work, all that work is it's head work, it's heart work, and it's hard work.
Mm.
All of it. It's not just spitting out data from your head and all the like arguments, right? As a lawyer, it's like I'm always looking for. It's also like your heart, right? Share storytelling, sharing things, listening compassionately and empathetically to the other point of view, right? It never hurts any of us to listen to the other point of view. Now, if that point of view is outrageously racist, yeah, it's going to hurt. But also, that is where you can start to find pathways to have conversation. And so, and this is where white folks come in, because again, I do not think that anti-racism work should solely lie with Black folks, because they should not have to bear the burden of pleading their humanity or trying to argue that they deserve equality or equity. They just should not all the time. Now, they should if they feel that that is their passion and their calling, right? And they're very effective at it, right? But I also think that white folks have a role in it, because it's like sometimes I will hear people in organizations say, well, I'm just a white guy, like I have nothing to say in DEI. And I'm like, contrary, no, you have a lot to say. You have you're the power broker. You are the one in power. You certainly have a big role to play in equity for sure. And so I think it's just, I want people to have more hard conversations. And again, people use this term all the time of like, let's, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Sure. But I want people to get comfortable with these conversations. Conversations about racism should not be so uncomfortable all the time, or sexism, or homophobia, or transphobia, or understanding difference, whatever. You should be comfortable having them, because these systems are designed to protect themselves. They punish us for having these conversations. They make them scary. They make them terrible and overwhelming, so nobody wants to do them. Everybody just wants to, go to their respective corners and not talk about it. But conversation to me is the key. And I've watched it happen. I've had hard conversations. I've been a part of them. And I have grown as a person in every one of these conversations, not just the other side, right? Like I grow in them. And I truly believe that this call to action of, going to white communities and getting them invested is it's also letting them know that, nobody expects perfection. We just expect you to be here on the journey. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes, and none of us know everything about every community, right? You may be incredibly well versed on anti-Black racism, but maybe you don't know so much about folks with neurodiversity, or people who have, traumatic brain injury and how that impacts them at work. No one expects everyone to know everything. And maybe you know a lot about socioeconomic stratification and inequities, but maybe don't know so much about Latinx communities or Muslim communities. And that's okay, right? Nobody expects you to know everything on everything. Like that's unfair to everybody. But what the expectation is that when you encounter a new community or a person, that you will meet them with love and I think honor them for who they are, And that's the entry into a relationship, is love and honor that person for who they are. So
Wow, thank you. So many gems in that. And Brandy, thank you for listening, Brandy Richard Thompson. So good to see you here this morning. Yes, thank you for sharing, Mindy. Uh, as you were talking, it was bringing up for me the New Zealand film director Jane Campion this week at a film awards ceremony. Um, uh, where Venus and Serena Williams were there in support of their film. Their film was being honored, the film they made about their father, King Richard. And Jane Campion, uh, who I think she's maybe in her 70s or 60s, white woman, gets up and calls Venus and Serena Williams marvels,
mhm,
and then says, "Unlike you, I've had to fight against men my entire career."
mhm,
So, like, comparing her struggle to Venus and Serena Williams' struggle. And
mhm,
this has been all over the internet. So, what do you hear in Jane Campion's comments? And yeah, what advice do you have for white women,
mhm,
about how to be a white woman in
mhm.
2022?
Yeah. So what I hear in this statement is just a complete lack of awareness about, I mean, first of all, Venus and Serena have had to deal with men and misogyny and sexism as well as racism, right? And so what I hear is just a complete lack of awareness. I also look at someone like her, the statements as being, again, there's almost this effort, I call it the oppression Olympics, like who has it worse, right? And that's the ugly part of systems of oppression, is they actually pit us against each other, right? And so in a way that we can't solve the underlying issues because we're fighting with each other, right? And so what I wish that she would have said is like, I have a little bit of insight into how discrimination and harassment and oppression works because of I was a woman competing against men and I was in this. So I have a little understanding, although I don't know what it's like to be a Black woman, right? That would have been the thing to say. It's like, I have a little insight because I have dealt with this. And kudos to you for dealing with the intersectional dynamics that you all have had to deal with, right? That's what we would
And
hope.
kudos to you for making this movie that gives us all so much more insight
Yeah.
into,
Yeah.
how you were able to do it and the role that your father and your family played in
Yeah.
setting you up for success. I
Yeah, and
mean,
I think, yeah, and I would say that, I read this with the Austin Bar Association. I'm the co-chair of their equity committee, and we're focusing on gender equity this year. And at the outset, I had everybody read Angela Davis's book, Women, Race, and Class. If
oh,
you haven't read that book, this is ground zero of your education. Pick that
yeah.
book up. I read that book in probably 1998 when I was in college in a feminist theory class, and I will tell you, it shaped the entire way that I did feminism, and understanding how racial equity is fundamental to gender equity, right? And that we have to lean into that. And that book is easy to read. It is from an academic, Angela Davis, and all around amazing human, but it is easy to read and digest. And there's a couple passages in there about the Grimsky sisters, who
Yes.
were like the ultimate in understanding interracial solidarity. And Angela Davis points them out, right? So if you don't understand why this woman's comments were so harmful by saying, "Hey, Venus and Serena, y'all didn't have to deal with what I did," uh, pick up Angela Davis's book, go get it. It is foundational, and it will teach you how to understand the intersectionality of these movements toward equity. And I mean, that would be my one takeaway of advice on this is if you're having a hard time understanding that. And then also, I think that women oftentimes, because we are socialized in a way to think there's only one seat for us at the table, that we compete with each other, right? That women will be like, they don't want to help each other. They want to say, oh, I had to struggle. I had to go through all this. I don't want that stuff to happen, right? Like, I don't want my daughter to have to go through the same things I did, or that my grandmother did, or not my great grandmother did. So it's this whole mentality of like, well, I had to pay my dues, so should you. Or, oh, it was so hard for me. The goal is not for it to be harder for other generations, right? The goal is for our children to move with more ease and less systemic barriers. And so don't play this game of like, I had it so hard and so should you. It's so weird. I think it's maybe rooted in capitalism. It's definitely rooted in like this feeling that we have to struggle. Life shouldn't be a struggle. Whoever came up with that
Internalized
concept
misogyny.
led us astray, right? And that's why we're all struggling. It's because it was designed to make us struggle. I don't want to struggle. Nobody does. But and again, like the goal of this work is to make it where the next generation isn't struggling as much. So anyways, I'm going to shout out Angela Davis every chance I get. And Women, Race, and Class, it's digestible. You'll get it. It's not going to be hard for you, but it will lead you down a path of understanding racial equity, how it's tied to gender equity, and sort of that intersectional component that if you're doing this work, you have to understand. So
Yes. And we're also in the midst of a spate of violence against Asian American women
mhm.
in particular. And I'd like to read a Instagram post by my friend Tammy Lee that she made in February. Tammy Lee is a Black woman. Last night, I was verbally attacked and physically threatened on the subway by a man screaming, "You black NC, you black NC," over and over with escalating violence. He was unwell. He was Black. Everyone else in the station at that time was white. They behaved as though both he and I were invisible. I'm not as okay as I want to be about everything I just said and the things I didn't. Why do you think white people sat there silent as this was happening? And what do you think we should have done instead?
Yeah. Well, I will. So I teach bystander intervention in a lot of the work that I do, and I've used it in for my own life, right? And I would say a couple things. I think first of all, uh, we do not see each other as from a place of love and community in
Mm,
this country. It's wild, and I don't. That's not just on race. That's on a lot of other aspects as well, but definitely race. And so when we see somebody being harmed, we don't see it as our problem.
mm,
And we also have been conditioned to dehumanize, I think, Black folks in this country by everything for the last 400 years, right? And so maybe that this woman did not need or deserve our attention. So I think
mm,
that's part of what it is. I also think people are very scared to intervene. Again, because it is scary to intervene. And I think we're so conditioned to accept violence around us at all times, and that's not the way it should be, right?
mm.
We are conditioned to this. This is an incredibly violent place. We have mass shootings constantly. That's not normal. It's not normal to
It's
go
not
into a
normal.
grocery store and wonder if you're going to die, right? It's not normal to have like a escape plan when you walk into Target, which I have that, of like, what do we do if something happens, right? And so I think we're conditioned to just accept violence around us. If you want to know how to intervene, I can give you like a quick step-by-step process. And I have used this. And the first step is to talk yourself into action. You need to have a personal statement, right? You need to have a personal policy. Mine is, if I see something, I'm going to say something. Is it always easy? No. Is it always comfortable? No. I joke with people, the reason I work out so hard is so that I'm ready for like combat at any moment. But really, this is how you intervene, and this is a researched and evidence based approach that should calm things down and not set you up for being harmed either. So, number one, focus on the person being harmed. So, in this scenario, someone's being screamed at, you can simply walk up to the person being screamed at and be like, hey, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while, right? You don't know that person, but you can pretend like you know them so that the aggressor thinks that you know them and thinks that, oh, wow, now they have somebody next to them, right? You just go up and say like, hey, how are you? How you doing? You know, it's been so long. And you completely pay no attention to the aggressor, right? You don't focus on the aggressor. That's not the goal when someone is being attacked verbally like this is to move them away from the situation, to actually intervene. Sometimes you have to place your body in between. Sometimes if you're at a grocery store, place your cart in between, right? You physically separate the two, and you don't focus on the aggressor. And then you move the person away. Hey, let's go grab a coffee. It's really nice to see you. You almost pretend like the incident's not going on. You don't want to go up to the person and say, oh my God, are you okay? Is everything okay? No, just say like, hey, how are you? Let's go grab some coffee, or let me walk with you, right? And you're just moving them away. And then you engage others if you need to, right? And so, and again, I think other people sometimes will engage with you if they see one person brave enough to intervene. Other people will step in. But you can also say like, hey, do you know where the nearest Starbucks is? Right? Like we're trying to go get a cup of coffee. It sounds goofy and cheesy, but I've used it. Right? I have been in a grocery store where there was a man. This was when my daughter was so little, she was in a baby carrier, and I was grocery shopping, and a man was yelling at someone in the grocery store, a woman who was in a hijab, and calling her all these racist things and making these comments. And I went up to her and said, hey, I haven't seen you so long. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. She looked at me like, what the heck? But she realized what I was doing, right? And I kind of maneuvered my cart, and I had the baby on. So it was like very, it was like, hey, woman with baby coming to talk to this person. The guy just turned around and walked away. And then I walked her to the front of the grocery store. I checked out with her and I walked her to her car. We never exchanged names, info. I just got her out of there, right? And it was very easy because you're not focusing on the aggressor. And what I would say is that one of the biggest acts of defiance in the world we're living in is to be loving, kind, and compassionate to each other. It's like that's defiance because there's just not enough of it, and so like in that, it's like step in for people. Go just play a role. Just play a role. Say, how are you? Haven't seen you. Let's go for a walk. And again, because you love that person. If it was your brother or your sister getting screamed at, you would intervene, right? Why doesn't everyone have that same value? I'll tell you, when I was a public defender, I looked at every one of my clients as if they were my brother or my sister. And I'm not kidding you. I love them. It made it very hard to be a public defender because I love them. So there was a lot of pain in my heart with what was going on. But it was the way to keep me ethical, honest, and engaged in my hundreds of clients, was to look at them as if they were my family. And I look at anybody like that, right? I'd help anybody. I don't care who you are. I don't care if our political views are different. I don't care if you're injured or hurt or you need help, I'm there to help you, right? And I think that is the ultimate act of defiance today, is to love a little harder on each other and be there for each other. Because I'll tell you, like in Texas, we're getting it from every angle. And all we need is people who will like love and support us.
Mindy, thank you so much. That was such a beautiful answer. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone will take note and practice that. And I will say this, there's been times when I've done upstander intervention and I've been scared, so scared. But it's like all it takes is one person to break the silence, and then other people start joining in. I think it's really true. We're about to wrap up. I just want to thank you so much for this conversation, and highlight that next week we will be here with some incredible educators from Georgia who are really engaged in um, how do we transform public education to have anti-racism taught in our schools? And they've been at this work for a very long time. So I'm super excited to welcome them. So please do tune in next week, March 24th. Mindy, to conclude our conversation today, If you could wave a magic wand and get white people to either start doing something or stop doing something, what would it be and why?
If I could wave a magic wand, it would be to get white people to completely realize that their humanity is directly tied with Black folks, Brown folks, marginalized folks, and that equity is the path forward. And if they could just realize that, if I could give a realistic thing though, instead of my magic wand, it would be that white parents raise anti-racist kids, because that's doable. It's very doable, and that doesn't require a magic wand. So
Yes. If you need help in that area, join Moms Allyship Against Racism. We are a free Facebook group and we have all kinds of programming. I'm so honored that my mentor, Karen Valentia Clopton, who is the chair of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. Hi, Karen. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mindy. Oh my God, so much wisdom. I'm so grateful for you and can't wait till our next in person encounter. And how can people keep in touch with you and utilize your services?
yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My company is called Fundamental Advisory, and we work across the country, across industry, and I have a fantastic team of people. So thank you all so much.
Oh, Marla. Thank you, Marla. That's why I'm doing this series. Woman, we gotta utilize the tools that we have to build the world that we want to see. And I know there's so many amazing people in the midst of all of this. It's super easy to get demoralized. And there's days when I don't want to get out of bed. And I'm so grateful to have Karen as my mentor because she's always encouraging me and inspiring me. But it's so important to not lose sight that there are so many good things going on. Nicole Hannah Jones had this amazing Twitter thread on Monday of parents and civil rights leaders and business leaders in states like Indiana and Wyoming preventing the passage of anti critical race theory laws in the state legislatures. So let's look at the people who are fighting back and figure out what we can do at the local level to fight back, as well as be in support of our siblings in places like Texas and checking in on them. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and tune in next week.
Bye.
Bye.